Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where tonight I'm going to talk about a controversial institution, a place where there are frequent accusations of rigging, that the worst rather than the best tend to get through, that those who come from independent backgrounds are totally shunned, where money rather than democracy rules the day, and where everyone is disappointed with the results at the end. That is, if they believe them. I'm, of course, talking about elections into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because yesterday in the evening they had their 2024 induction ceremony. And let me just start out by saying, is it a corrupt institution? Yes. Is the voting process really suspect? Yes. Is it going through an identity crisis? Is it the Pop Music Hall of Fame? Is it the sort of all music from the 1950s to the present day Hall of Fame? Is it everything but a few varieties of music Hall of Fame? It's got no real identity anymore. Steve Miller made it very clear during his induction, that it's basically a chance for the people that run it to more or less extort the artists. And others have made that point too. You only get a limited number of free tickets. Every additional ticket as an artist is $10,000, including other members of the band if there's no sort of consistent original lineup, wives, family, kids, friends, all the rest of it. And so, yeah, we know that it's a corrupt institution. But I still watched, not because I'm a hypocrite, but because it does, as an institution, serve a purpose. It's one forum that does have a lot of both alternative media and legacy media attention, where a lot of good artists, if not great artists, get to be talked about and in many cases get to perform. And that's never a bad thing. If people are talking about music, especially music that might be a few years or even a few decades off the sort of singles charts or the Spotify charts, I think that that's a good thing, because people talking about music leads people to listen to music. It really is all about listening to the music. I mean, that's what the Doobie Brothers said, and who am I to disagree with them? So, of all of the performances yesterday, two it really stuck out as stealing the show. And the first one, in no particular order, was, of course, Peter Frampton. Now, Peter Frampton, a few years ago, announced he was diagnosed with, I think, a kind of muscular disorder that he said will eventually force him to stop performing. But the good news is various medical scientific innovations have allowed him to continue playing, and he did not miss a beat. He did a wonderful performance. It featured Keith Urban playing rhythm guitar with him. And yeah, Peter was sitting down playing because of his age and because of that particular issue, but it was really a stellar performance. Most of it built around his most famous track, Do You Feel Like I Do? Everyone knows all the words to that song. Well, at least some in the audience will. But the whole performance, the whole set that he did was really good. Roger Daltrey welcomed him into the Hall of Fame. They obviously go back very far, from the time that Frampton was in his first band called The Herd, and then he joined Humble Pie. In his speech, he talked about how Humble Pie should be in the Hall of Fame, which they absolutely should. Steve Marriott, Clem Clemson, what a wonderful, wonderful band that obviously Peter Frampton co-founded. And obviously, he talked very candidly about a solo career that went up kind of like a rocket. His first solo album sold well, not brilliantly, but they are some of the best albums you'll hear. Then obviously came Frampton Comes Alive. The rocket went up, it went back down. Even though the music he recorded in the early 80s after the rocket went down was really, really good. So definitely check out those albums. And I'll just quickly tell you which ones I personally recommend. Definitely check out The Art of Control and Breaking All the Rules. Wonderful albums from this so-called wilderness period in Frampton's career. Later in the 80s, somewhat of a comeback album. He had Premonition. But there were several things in the speech that really stuck out. One, he always he kind of drove the point home that he always considered himself first and foremost a guitarist who loves playing the guitar, loves taking it to new places, loves composing for the guitar. And great musicians, great music listeners, and even and aspiring musicians, they've known this about Peter Frampton for a long time. He is one of the finest guitarists of all time, bar none. And to prove that, in his post indictment induction press conference, he even said that when he was at the 5150 studios of Eddie Van Halen, Eddie actually complimented him and said that one of the songs that Van Halen did, Peter didn't say which one, was something that Eddie stole from, in Eddie's words, according to Peter, the song Nowhere's Too Far for My Baby from the Frampton album from 75, just before Frampton Comes Alive went huge. Great song, great album. Check it out. And Rick Beato, who we've talked about on this channel, he's the OG of this whole YouTube scene. He's talked about Frampton's wonderful guitar playing. He's interviewed him several times. And I think that it was really important for Frampton at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to really emphasize that his true legacy isn't his fame, isn't the girls going wild, all of that, even though I'm sure it was fun at the time for him. But his real legacy is of a wonderful guitar player with a really unmatched sense of harmony and of flow, how one chord just flows into the other, that element of surprise that I always talk about as such an essential element of both soloing and composing. And Frampton, as a songwriter and a guitar player, really got both of those really nailed perfectly. The other thing that he talked about was how David Bowie kind of revived his reputation. Because while the albums that he released in the late 70s and early 80s were, as I said, very good, people started hating on him because of his two things, really. One, he was a victim of his success. Everyone had Frampton Comes Alive. He was perceived as a sort of teen idol, even though he wasn't in his teens. Frank Zappa did a great song about that called I'm In You. I Have Been In You, based on the Frampton song I'm In You, which has really good chord changes, by the way. And Zappa was wonderful with his parody. And then, of course, there was his role in the disastrous but now cult film, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club film from, I think that was 79. It hurt the Bee Gees' career for a while, hurt Frampton's career for a while, didn't hurt Aerosmith's career, weirdly. They were in it, although they needed a comeback too a few years later. But it was David Bowie who sort of rescued him in terms of his reputation when he decided to go out on tour with him for his Glass Spider tour in 1988. He played on the studio album just before that. It was Bowie who was, and this I didn't know, Frampton explained he was a family friend because Peter's father was one of David Bowie's art teachers, and they had been very close as a family for a long time. And he said, without saying it, David was able to rescue my career, and from there on out, up till the present day, 1987, up till the present day, Frampton has been doing the live circuit. He's been playing festivals. He's been everywhere you really want him to be. And while he never had the sort of chart success that he had in the Frampton Comes Alive era, he's really been a consistently beloved performer in both big, medium, and small places, but increasingly pretty good size. And a lot of that is thanks to his friend, David Bowie. And the album, just for if you want to check it out, it was the Never Let Me Down album that Peter played on, and then the Glass Spider tour after that. Now, the second band that really stole the show was Kool and the Gang, and I have to put an asterisk next to the performance only because a lot of the original members are sadly dead. This includes co-founder Ronald Bell, but his brother Robert Kool Bell was very much there, and that was really fun, as was the lead singer who was with the band for the sort of hits period. I'll explain what that means in a minute. James J.T. Taylor. They were there, members of the Roots backing them up, and the performance was just perfect. Really sad that a lot of the original members aren't here anymore, but the two, the one founding member, Kool himself and JT, they put on a great show with the Roots. And Kool and the Gang, I've talked about how good they are on this channel before. When they really began, they were pretty much a jazz band. And they go back all the way to the early 1960s, even though it was only at the end of the 60s when they first came out. And their early music was sort of jazz fusiony type of stuff. And then they got increasingly into sort of funk, but maintaining a lot of their jazz sensibilities in terms of the many solos that the guys in the band would take, in terms of the high caliber of musicianship, in terms of the great writing. And then, of course, they had their sort of third era, if they will. And this was when JT joined the band. And that's when all the huge hits like Celebration and Ladies' Night and Cherish and all of these really, really wonderful songs came out. Just some of my favorites from all the eras. Check out Summer Madness, which was still kind of into the jazzy era. From their sort of hit era, you can check out Heidi Hi, Heidi Ho. Really, really good song. Misled, wonderful. Fresh, Emergency, Surrender, really good. Joanna, really, really good stuff. Going back to the earlier era, Sea of Tranquility, very much in that jazz era. Light of the Worlds, the title track from what's probably my favorite Kool and the Gang album. Also, if you want to see them sort of indulging their more funky, solo-y, somewhat jazzy side, check out Spirit of the Boogie. You really can't go wrong. They didn't put out any bad albums. And of course, Wild and Peaceful was sort of their quintessential funk album. Jungle Boogie, Hollywood Swingin', wonderful, wonderful stuff. So they really stole the show. Obviously, the two, let's say, members of a classic lineup, but backed up by musicians who not only knew the music, loved the music, but really were having a good time playing the music. So for me, that really stole the show. But there were other things as well. Ozzy Osbourne got inducted as a solo artist. He looked pretty frail. He was sitting down the whole time, too frail to sing. So we hope that if it's possible that he feels better with the various ailments. But he gave a really nice speech. I wish that he had mentioned Jackie Lee, the guitarist who was with him in the mid 80s, who was recently shot while walking his dog in Las Vegas. We hope and pray he gets better. He did, of course, mention Randy Rhoads, the man credited with reviving his musical career when he became a solo artist and no record labels wanted to touch him. And paying tribute to Randy Rhoads is the son of a guitar player, often considered one of the best players of that era, along with Randy Rhoads. And this was Wolfgang Van Halen, who played the Randy Rhoads solo on the song Crazy Train. And it was a star-studded lineup. You had Zakk Wylde, who's been Ozzy's lead guitarist for years. You had Billy Idol, and the whole thing was great. Maynard, oh God, is it Maynard Ferguson from Tool was there too? And they did the set there. It was Crazy Train, Mama, I'm Coming Home, and No More Tears. And the guys, the multiple musicians that were on that stage really pulled it off well. And Wolf, who's a very interesting kid, wonderful solo. There's really nothing he can't do. He has the mentality of a session musician, and I say that as a compliment in the sense that you put him in a situation. Generally, at these events, there's not all that much rehearsal. Sound checks are notoriously bad at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You throw someone like Wolf in there, and he can do it. And that is that wonderful session musician mentality. Another band long overdue for being inducted. One of my favorite bands of all time, Foreigner. What a band! Foreigner, along with Journey and Boston and REO, they probably really solidified the AOR, album-oriented rock, as that future direction of rock music from the late 70s into the early 90s. The idea that rock music can be melodically sophisticated, incredibly well produced, well performed, but also among musicians who can do it all without the good production, because all of those bands I mentioned can all play in their various guises live, without nets, without all of the crap, These are real musicians. And those first Foreigner albums are really good when they had a rather bigger lineup than they later had. The first three albums, I think, I mean, all of their albums are good, but the first three in particular were really amazing. The self titled from 77, Double Vision the next year, Head Games after that. And what a lineup! I just want to mention how talented they all were. Lou Gramm, the original and for me the quintessential Foreigner singer, one of the finest vocalists in rock, one of the finest vocalists who ever sung on a pop record of any kind. Wonderful stuff. Mick Jones, who had already been in one of my other favorite bands, Spooky Tooth, up until this point, but he was sort of the main writer, guitar player, even played a bit of keyboards. Mick Jones. Ian MacDonald was in the original lineup, playing both saxophone, flute, keyboards, and the occasional guitar. Ian MacDonald, he of course was in King Crimson, had some solo stuff that you really should check out. Al Greenwood, wonderful keyboard player. Ed Gilardi on bass. Dennis Elliott on drums, who was before that in the wonderful jazz fusion band If. Really good stuff. So definitely check out those first three albums. But of course, they went on as a quartet, and the album Four from 1981 solidified that. And it was, of course, in 1984 that they had their biggest hit, which, if someone would ask me, what is the best produced pop sort of popular song of all time? I would be tempted to say, I Want to Know What Love Is, because that song just has it all. It is just, it's the perfect popular song, the perfect AOR song. It had it all. And Lou talked later on about, oh, he wished the band were equally remembered for their other stuff. I think they had loads of hits, loads of really big hits, but that hit really sort of solidified the job. Inside Information from 87, don't sleep on that. Really good album, and it includes the ballad I Don't Want to Live Without You. Really good stuff. The song Inside Information itself, really good. And the people who paid tribute to Foreigner, there were several. I'm just trying to refresh my memory here. I cannot recall the name of the woman who sung Feels Like the First Time. She was okay. She was okay, but things really got going when Sammy Hagar did Hot Blooded. He is, I'm a huge fan of his. He's always fun. And the surprise of the night was when Lou Gramm came out with Kelly Clarkson of talk show American Idol and pop record fame to do I Want to Know What Love Is. And she was really good. I know that Kelly Clarkson fans and Foreigner fans generally aren't the same people, but I thought that she did a really good job. Lou, of course, did admirably. He's not young anymore, no one is, but he did well. And I thought it was really fitting. By the way, Kelly Hansen, the sort of post Lou Gramm singer, also joined Sammy Hagar on that. So that was all very fun. Now, Dionne Warwick was absolutely fantastic. She sung with the wonderful vocalist Jennifer Hudson, and together they really proved why female gospel vocal, if you want to sort of break that glass, you can't really do better. And yeah, Dionne, her hair is white. She's not as young as she used to be, but especially considering her age, she has still got it. She was, of course, on my list of best female vocalists of all time, which I did on one of these live streams a few weeks ago. So definitely check that out to hear more about her. Now, who else was there? A Tribe Called Quest, one of the more interesting hip hop groups of all time, because they were always a group that really pioneered interesting beats. The music that underlined the actual rap was always very interesting, and the rap was always kind of avant-garde, yet memorable at the same time. All of their initial albums from the late 80s into the 90s, and even the stuff they were doing in the early 2000s, was really good. Dave Chappelle, who's been a big fan on his original Chappelle show. He had them as guests, and they were great. He inducted them, and they performed also with members of the Roots, who also backed Kool and the Gang. They were great. They were just as good as you'd expect, and everyone seemed to be having a lot of fun on that stage. Who else was there? Oh, I found the tab with the video because I've got all these videos open because I've been watching this stuff and finding it interesting. It was Demi Lovato who sung "Feels Like the First Time" as a tribute, and yeah, it wasn't bad, but I'm thinking that particular one could have been better. So let's see what else I saw. There was Cher. She got inducted in her own right. Previously, she had been inducted as a member of Sonny and Cher, but this was to honor her solo career, which was one of the longest solo careers ever, with so many twists and turns. When she divorced Sonny at a time when divorce wasn't perceived exactly as it is now, she had to rebuild her career. There was Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves, which was a huge hit. In the late 80s, she had another revival with If I Can Turn Back Time. Then in the 90s, she had another revival with Believe, the song that made the use of obvious auto tune acceptable. But in Cher's absolute defense, one, she can sing and always has been able to, still can. She was using the auto tune on that track as an effect, not as a crutch. Others who came subsequent to that used it and continue to use it as a crutch, but don't blame Cher, it's just an effect. A bit like what the vocoder was in the late 70s and 80s. Roger Troutman, of course, can really sing, but he just thought it was more interesting to sing it through the talk box. So there you go. Peter Frampton too, of course. Do you feel? So Cher performed "Believe." Do you believe with Dua Lipa, the young pop singer, who actually really did a good job. People think, oh, well, Dua Lipa's from this era where you can sort of massage out any mistake or any shortcoming in order to do, but she could sing. She was singing live, and Cher joined her halfway through, and that was all really fun and nice. Let's see who else I'm missing here, just going through the people that I watched. And the whole thing sort of made me think. Um, a lot of these artists in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or Pop Music Hall of Fame, call it what you will, they're not young anymore. Rock and roll is coming to an end. It's already come to an end in terms of its chart success. The early 2000s really was the final era when there was a great deal of rock on the charts. Everything since has been either dance music or hip hop derived pop music. That's not to say hip hop itself, although there are many hip hop songs on the charts, but a lot of it is hip hop derived dance music in the same way that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s you had rock and roll derived pop music. And it's really got me thinking. A lot of the stuff on this channel is about remembering people who have been lost, and it goes to it just made me think of several things. People were listening to Beethoven and Wagner and Dvorak and Tchaikovsky and Brahms long after they died. If you go into a concert hall, whether in Japan or Europe or North America today, you'll see a lot of those names on the programs of music being played. It was really in the between the late 80s and early 2000s when we lost a lot of the pop stars from that golden era of pop. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra both died in the 90s. Perry Como and Andy Williams in the early-ish 2000s. Sammy Davis sadly died even before that. And it was an era that really came to an end. When you look at the jazz greats from the 50s and 60s, those who made it out of the 50s and 60s, I mean, Charlie Parker didn't, John Coltrane didn't, Miles Davis died in the 90s. Chick Corea, who was younger than that, he came out in the late 60s. He died just a few years ago. Other jazz greats from that era are Art Blakey died in the 90s. Max Roach, he was dead even before that, if memory serves me well. And so we do have to come to terms with the fact that while the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame used to be known as a celebration of a living art and of the people who died young, the people like Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Keith Moon, Mark Bolan, John Bonham, people like that. It's now becoming something that is really a museum. And I've always said music doesn't belong in a museum. Music belongs in the hearts and minds of the people who love it. It belongs in the clubs, it belongs in record stores, on streaming services, in stadiums and arenas, in concert halls. And it is true that putting music in a museum, there's kind of a moribund feeling that surrounds it. But as much as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is corrupt, like I said at the beginning, I really like the fact that it gives people like me, like you, like everyone else out there, a chance to talk about music that we really like, because there's so much music to talk about that we kind of need these signposts. Oh, it's someone's birthday. Oh, someone is releasing a new album. Someone is remixing an old album or remastering an old album. For those of you who don't know the difference, remixing is when you go back to the multi-tracks and really do the album as if it was new. Obviously, the recording of the stems, the original tracks, that's set in stone, but you're taking those stems, you're taking those multi-track tapes, as it usually is, and doing different things with them. Whereas remastering is taking the finished product, the master, and making sure it sounds as good as it can. And there's a lot of subjective artistry in the mastering process, as I've talked about in previous shows. There's different schools of thought between, let's say, someone like Stan Ricker and someone like Steve Hoffman. Everyone has their own mastering style. And if you go to Steve Hoffman's website, the Steve Hoffman Forum, you can see just how spirited these arguments are. I would say a bit more democratic than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But where was I? So yeah, music shouldn't be in a museum. It should be played, whether it's a recording that's being played, or whether you're going out and watching live music being performed, or whether you're performing it yourself. But it helps to have these signposts. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is one of these signposts. You don't need the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to let you know that Kool and the Gang and Peter Frampton and Foreigner and A Tribe Called Quest and Ozzy Osbourne and Cher and Dionne Warwick were really, really talented and remain so. But it helps. And if it helps their record sales, and by that, I generally mean streaming revenue, which isn't much. But if it helps them sell live tickets, if it helps them sell merchandise, I'm all for that. Anything that can help an artist in this day and age, I'm 100% for the result, even if I'm not particularly for the process that got us there. And of course, frankly, they should maybe do the event twice a year, because it we shouldn't have to wait much longer for people to sadly die for them to get in there. Let's celebrate it. Let's get as many people from an older generation as possible in there while they're still around to appreciate it and interact with the fans. And then when that generation goes, maybe they can call it the Rock and Pop Hall of Fame, the North American Music Hall of Fame. And that might help to sort of keep it up with the times, keep it contemporary, so that when the last of the rock stars goes, they'll still be able to at least feature and honor musicians from other genres. That's what I think. Let me know what you think in the chat. Um, it looks like I'm gaining some subscribers, and that's going to really help. If I get 500 more, which might sound like a lot, I'll be able to do a lot more with this channel. It's free to subscribe. I'm not like Netflix, as you might be fooled by the wonderful sort of lighting that I have behind me, that this is some sort of Netflix production. It's not. So subscribing is free, but it does help me. Liking is important. Sharing is very good. And unlike the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I can assure you that there's nothing rigged about this show. So like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.